To Merid! Welcome to the team, declared Tammy, raising her glass high. The rest of the crowded table followed suit. Merid! Merid froze for a moment, uncomfortable as the full attention of all his new co-workers homed in on him. Thankfully, the social lubricant he had been plying all night was working its magic, and he was able to force out a smile. To me! With a loud cheer, everyone drank to the toast. Tammy, taking her role as team leader seriously, drained her cocktail completely. With a flourish, she slammed the empty glass on the table and proudly stuck out her glowing neon tongue, a side effect from the bar's drink special, the Wall Banger. The more you drank, the brighter your tongue. Tammy had light practically shooting out of her ears by this point. Looking down at his own dwindling drink, Merid wondered the status of his tongue. They were already 4 rounds deep and he was well on his way from pleasantly tipsy to full-on pissed. It was hard to believe the bacchanalian revel that surrounded him was the same group who had been hotly debating how to tackle a systems hierarchy issue at that morning's stand-up meeting. He had only been in New Babbage less than 48 hours, but it seemed that the warnings he had heard about the place were 100% well-deserved. This city liked to party. On face value alone, he probably should have taken one of the other job offers he'd received. Saga Data Systems had offered him way more money and a ridiculous starting package loaded with perks. The use of the company's 300i had almost swayed him. And while Fiskars wasn't going to pay him as much as Saga, if he had taken their offer, he would have been basically running his own team. They were kicking off a major new project and had been looking for someone with his specific background to spearhead storage infrastructure. But then there was what Microtech had offered, the chance to work on the single largest information tangle ever created. With an adoption rate of close to 56% of the human population, more data sailed through the Mobiglass networks in a single day than all transfers of the previous century combined. Basically, his dream job. And so here he was, a brand new Microtech data engineer getting drunk for the 3rd time in his life. The woman sitting next to Merid slapped his shoulder and asked what he wanted to drink next. That afternoon, she had walked him through the custom developer's GUI that he'd be using to code and shown off the Rory Nova figurine collection that crowded her desk. He couldn't remember her name. Connie? Catherine? His head was swimming and he suddenly felt too warm. He needed some air. You know what? Next round's on me, said Merid, standing up from the table. There were protests, but he silenced them with, Hey, you said I was part of the team, right? With that sorted, they quickly shouted their orders at him, which he tried his best to memorise. Before heading to the bar, he walked away from the crowds towards the window that looked out at the frozen wasteland of Microtech, the planet. Touching his hand against the cool surface, he felt better almost immediately. Outside, bright lights shone from the city into the snowstorm, creating a dazzling effect against the black night sky. It was a unique experience to have a dense, sweating mass of humanity on one side of him, and the pure isolation of the tundra on the other. It reminded him of working on a project, his mind completely focused on the numbers and code, but part of him still aware of the chaos swirling around him. Apparently I get poetical when I get drunk, he thought, and laughed. He took a deep breath and staggered back into the crowd. The bartender greeted Merid with a 1,000-credit smile. You're new to Wally's bar, aren't you? I'd remember a face as lovely as yours. Merid flushed, caught off guard by the compliment. Before he could respond, the bartender continued. I'm buying you a drink to celebrate. What should I make you? I see you've tried the Wallbanger already, he said, pointing to Merid's mouth. Actually, you know what? I've been working on a real special drink. He leaned across the bar. If you're interested, I can hook you up. Easy, Eddie. This one isn't for you, directed a voice close by. Merid looked over to see a shock of bright purple hair paired with equally purple eyes as a newcomer took the spot next to him at the bar. The bartender's demeanour instantly changed. He straightened up and shrugged. Of course, no worries. I was just messing around. He walked quickly away to help another customer. It took a second for Merid's slowed thoughts to catch up. Wait, I need to get drinks for my friends. But the bartender was already out of earshot. Looks to me like they're taken care of. The stranger pointed over Merid's shoulder, where his co-workers eagerly poured each other shots from a bottle of Souls. Huh, guess someone else must have ordered. Yeah, part of the magic of Wally's. Alcohol just sort of happens. I'm Mac, by the way. Merid. Let me guess. If you're hanging with that crowd, you must work for Microtech. Yeah, today was my first day, actually. A big smile spread across the stranger's face. What? Congrats, that's so exciting. Merid found himself smiling back. He had been so nervous about impressing his co-workers and making a good first impression that it hadn't really sunk in until Mac had pointed it out. It was really exciting. Merid, I would love to get you a drink to celebrate your new job. Of course, if you say yes, there's no obligation to stay and chat with me. Mac smiled again. Though I'd be pretty happy if you did. Merid glanced back at his co-workers. Tammy was standing at the head of the table with a sim helmet on, doing what looked like a front stroke as the rest of the group cheered. Just the thought of wading back into the party was exhausting. Really, he should just go to his flat and get some rest before work tomorrow. Another customer pushed to the bar next to him, causing Merid to slide closer to Mac. A warmth spread through him from where their arms touched. Or he could stay and have one more drink. Yeah, I'd love a drink. I was hoping you'd say that. Quicker than he thought possible, 2 drinks appeared in front of them. Mac raised a glass. To your new job. Merid never knew he could hate anything as much as he hated the sound of birds chirping at that very moment. He slowly peeled his eyes open, squinting in the sunlight. As the room came into focus, a whole flock of birds flitted above his bed, singing happily. Alarm! Snooze! Unable to comply, snooze limit reached. The HAB controls responded cheerfully. Crap. Merid rolled out of his bed and stumbled into the alarm off button. As soon as he pressed it, the bird projection mercifully switched off and the lighting dropped to a normal level. Even with the noise gone, his head still ached. In fact, his whole body was aching. Plus, his mouth tasted like a cotton ball soaked in sewer water. Right, this is why I don't drink. He glanced at the clock and grimaced. So much for making a good impression on his second day at work. After a long internal debate about whether to get back into bed or not, followed by a quick shower, Merid dug out his sunglasses from an unpacked moving crate and headed to the cafe a few blocks from his HAB. It seemed he wasn't the only one having a rough morning. The place was packed with bleary-eyed people. While he waited in the long line to get an extra-large stim-laced coffee, he popped open his Moby. He couldn't remember coming home last night and was curious to see what his stats were. For the last couple years, he had gotten into the habit of tracking a bunch of different personal metrics. Some of them the Moby OS tracked by default, like distance travelled and heart rate, but others he had coded himself, pupil dilation, ambient noise levels, how many times he checked his Moby, etc. He scrolled through the night, seeing the numbers fluctuate as his body reacted to various stimuli. That's odd. According to the data, for an hour last night he had done the exact same thing he had done the previous hour. No discernible change whatsoever. That shouldn't be possible. Even standing still produced quantifiable changes in the data. Something must have gone wrong. He accessed the dev controls and started looking for what could have caused the error. After ensuring that the sensors were all functioning normally, he started to acknowledge the worst of all possibilities. Sir, your order? Merid realised that he had been blocking the front of the line. Sorry. He stepped out of the way without getting a coffee. The fog from earlier that morning had been cleared by the sinking realisation that he had been hacked. It was cleverly done, no denying that. Even a casual user might notice if there was time missing or erased, but by looping the data from the previous hour, the loss blended in almost perfectly. If it wasn't for Merid's obsession with data, he might not have noticed himself. He dove deeper into his system and opened up an image of the Moby's memory substrate. Luckily, his guess had been right. Whatever malicious program had been used, it worked by actively overwriting data, not by changing the underlying data itself. He was able to see what memory units had been accessed during the missing hour. Merid knew instantly what the hacker had been after. His employee keycode. It was a unique identifier that gave him access to the Microtech offices and more specifically, to his dev processor. Worried about corporate espionage, and apparently rightly so, Microtech had set up its development environments in isolated cells. Employees could only access their own sectors unless given active approval by security. So, if someone wanted to access the data engineering team files, they would need one of those specific key codes. Not only that, but key codes were hard encoded into the specific person's Moby. Yesterday, he had sat in the security office having it physically transferred into his unit through a connector cable. For someone to steal one, they had to physically access the Moby. The drinks, the flirting, the casual inquiries into Marid's new job. Mac's interest in him suddenly made a lot more sense. His first instinct had been to run back to Wally's bar and try to track down Mac, but the logical part of his brain that was still functioning beneath his panic and anger pointed out that the bar wouldn't be open for another 5 hours. Hell, Mac probably didn't even have purple hair and eyes anymore. The hacker had most likely chosen the loud colouring as a distraction more than a fashion choice. No, the right thing to do would be go report the breach to Microtech Security. He corrected his route and headed towards the gleaming headquarters building, the sweeping lines of its unique design rising to meet the curved dome overhead in an impressive display of modern architecture. Hard to believe that when he had woken up, his biggest worry was being late for work. Instead, he was about to cop to being responsible for a major security breach. He would go straight to Tammy and let her know everything, and then they could initiate a quarantine to close down any vulnerabilities. With the amount of access Marid had on his system, it would be a massive operation. Plus, they would most likely have to go public since direct consumer data was involved. Even with the encryption protocols in place, the raw information stored on Microtech servers contained billions of transactions and comms that could be used for nefarious credit-making purposes. People used their Mobiglass for almost everything. It would be a publicity nightmare. Hello and welcome to Microtech, where we work to make each day better, the perky holographic Microtech representative chirped as he entered. Marid had reached the sprawling high-tech showroom just outside the main offices. Here, Microtech had their latest and greatest offerings on display, from high-end Mobiglass models to massive top-of-the-line full-immersion SIM pods. Is there anything I can help you with? As he walked along, the representative floated alongside, ready to assist if he needed anything. Only cutting-edge sales technology for Microtech. It was painful to think about leaving all of this behind. Forget about the fact that getting fired a week into his new job would probably tarnish his reputation enough that other companies wouldn't want to touch him. It hurt more to know that he would never get to start on all the grand projects he had been planning. We have a new line of holo projectors that you just have to see to believe. Marid was about to dismiss the annoyingly chipper representative when a thought occurred to him. He didn't have any concrete evidence that Microtech had been breached yet. All he would do by saying something now was cause a panic. He quickly convinced himself that the prudent thing to do would be to check the system first and see if there was an actual cause for alarm. No point in calling out fire if there weren't any flames, right? After hours of searching, he finally found a discrepancy, but only because he knew there was something to look for. Just like the intrusion on his Moby, this was extremely well done. Mac was turning out to be quite the hacker. There was some satisfaction in knowing that he had at least been conned by someone with considerable skill. His system had been infected with a classic lawnmower virus, just trimming a little off the top at a time. Altogether, the data it skimmed looked like nonsense, but there would be a companion program on the other end that could recompile everything into its original form. This version was particularly well done because rather than running in a straight, more traceable line, it jumped around randomly through the data structure. Impressive. And helpful to Marid. This adjustment meant the virus worked at a much slower rate than typical. Plus, it was hiding its data transmissions by burying minuscule packets inside the normal traffic so that no one would notice the slight bandwidth change. This was a virus designed to work for months, if not years, gathering up everything it could. If he cut it off now, barely any data at all would have been collected from Microtech servers. Marid began to program a fence that he could use to quarantine the virus. However, just before he could implement it, there was a knock on his work pod. Marid looked up to see Tammy standing at the entrance, sipping from a thermos that read, "Data engineers have the same amount of fun, more efficiently." Smiling, he said, "Morning, Tammy," as his fingers surreptitiously pressed the hotkeys to minimise the files on his screen. "Hey, Marid. Just wanted to say that I saw this morning's logs." Marid's entire body tensed. He would have blurted out everything right then and there if he hadn't been momentarily paralysed by fear. "Can't believe you came into the office that early this morning, especially not after the night we had. Happy to know you can hold your own next time we hit the town." Merid breathed a sigh of relief. If he didn't get fired today, he appreciated the irony that Mac using his keycode to access the building early this morning might actually win him a few points with his boss. Though, it was strange knowing the hacker had been sitting in this seat just a few hours earlier. You know what they say, work hard, play hard. Tammy nodded. That is pretty much the unofficial motto of Microtech. If you have a free minute, I was hoping to walk you through the restructuring effort that I was hoping you'd tackle this week. Her doing anything at his workstation was about the last thing he wanted right now. He scrambled for an excuse. Anyway, we could do that tomorrow. I would love one more day to really settle in before diving full on into a project. Alright, but I fully expect you to be ready to jump into the deep end tomorrow. Also, I really want to go swimming now. Have you been to the Club Olympus? They have an outdoor deck with hot tubs. The cold mixing with the hot. So great. You have to try it. Sounds incredible, for sure. Let me know next time you're going, said Merid with as much get out of my work pod in his voice as he could politely muster. With Tammy gone, he quickly reopened the quarantine protocol and rechecked his work one last time before implementing. Everything looked good. As soon as he enabled it, the virus would be completely cut off, and then what? Would he then tell security what had happened? He would be in more trouble if they found out he waited. Plus, Mac would know that something had happened once the flow of data was interrupted. Who knew what the hacker's next move would be after that? Merid could send falsified data packets out, but that would only prolong the inevitable. The way he saw it, he had 3 viable choices. 1, he could go back to his original plan and tell Microtech what was happening. 2, he could find where the data was being sent and attempt to eradicate the security breach at the source. 3, he could just pretend like he never knew and let the lawnmower keep running. There was a very strong chance that the first option would result in him being terminated. The second option was considerably more dangerous since there was no telling who or what he might run into, but the chances of him keeping his job were much higher. He would almost certainly keep his job if he went for the third option, at least for a while longer, but now that the Pandora's box was open, he wasn't the type of person that could just let the data he was entrusted with continue to be stolen. Closing the quarantine, Merid opened up a new window to begin tracing where the data packets were being sent. When his transport shuttle had flown across the tundra 2 days prior, it had not prepared Merid in any way for how cold it would actually be, standing outside New Babbage's protective dome. Even though his suit was rated for extreme temperatures, as he stepped from the protective interior of the small ice skiff he had rented, the biting cold cut straight to his core. The wind made it even worse. If it wasn't for the tiny pitons along the sole of his boots gripping the packed snow, he would have been blown away. It had taken him all afternoon to find the source. Mac had covered the data's tracks well, bouncing the packets between dozens of spec hubs. He had almost lost the path when the data was routed through a sim arcade, but he was able to pick up the trail as the data was piped through a private comm relay transmitting away from the dome. For the last leg of the journey, Merid had to use a narrow field scanner to physically follow the signal. Making it even more difficult was the fact that the broadcast bursts were few and far between. He would pick up the signal for only a few milliseconds before it would disappear again. In the end, the signal had brought him to this remote stretch of icy nothing. The snow whipped around him, clogging his mask and making it difficult to see farther than a metre or 2. He had briefly made the mistake of using a flashlight, but the snow reflected the light, blinding him. Sweeping the scanner back and forth, Merid homed in on the signal. Standing out here, he understood why the skiff rental company had issued so many warnings and made him sign several releases before leaving the dome. Part of their caution probably had to do with most of their rentals being to weekend warriors looking to do some extreme iceboarding, but there was no denying that Microtech was a very inhospitable environment. From where he stood, the near featureless horizon looked the same on all sides. If the skiff lost power for any reason, he would be hopelessly stuck out here. Suddenly, the scanner jumped from his grip and his hand throbbed from an unseen impact. Groping about, he realised that there was a white comm dish directly in front of him that had blended almost seamlessly with the tundra. Even now, knowing where it was still hard to make out. He bent and found the base of the dish. There, buried under the snow, a thick bundle of cables led away. He followed it the best he could, but scraping the snow away with his gloved hands quickly proved painful as the cold ate through his protective layers. He was almost forced to give up when his hands started to go numb, but he thankfully found where the trunk line terminated just as the feeling totally left his fingers. Hidden by a thin layer of fresh snowfall laid a metal hatch. Merid swept the area clean but couldn't find an access terminal anywhere. Was it some sort of remote wireless lock? He adjusted the scanner to try and detect a local small wave transmission but found nothing. Desperate, he tried pulling on the hatch. It opened easily, sending Merid flying backwards into the snow. Embarrassed, even though there was no one to witness his folly, he brushed himself off and proceeded to climb down the ladder. Below was a small bunker densely packed with a server array. The heat coming off the racks was intense, but a piping system that ran throughout the bunker used the frigid external temperature as a heat sink for the units. This natural cooling was part of the reason Microtech had chosen to purchase this world in the first place. They saved billions in credits every year thanks to the planet's freezing climate. Merid headed to the access terminal. Sure enough, he found the compiler program that was the mate to the virus on his system. The data arrived here and was slowly put together. Though there was a massive amount of information in storage here, most of it was still fragmented. The small amount that became viable was transferred off the main server onto a portable drive for collection and analysis. Looking through the records, Merid realised that he was not the first of Mac's victims. The server was collecting data from most of New Babbage's biggest tech firms, including at least 3 separate sources inside Microtech itself. There were schematics from a company developing an improved EVA stabiliser that used a third of the normal fuel. There was internal documentation from PyPlum Software discussing their new proprietary compression algorithm. There were even vids showing early levels from an unannounced Star Marine 3. And that was only what had been compiled so far. Who knew what else was lurking in the fragments? He had stumbled onto a treasure trove of stolen information. Methodically, he went around the bunker and deactivated the cooling system's emergency redundancies. With each one he turned off, the temperature in the room rose higher. Alarms began to sound, but when the automatic systems tried to prevent disaster by flooding the room with ice water, it was already too late. Merid's suit sounded a warning of its own. The temperature was reaching a dangerous level. Taking the portable drive with him, he climbed the ladder and closed the hatch once more, finishing the transformation of the bunker into an oven. Over the next half hour, Merid watched from the skiff as the ice cracked and the hot steam vented from below the surface. By now, any piece of tech that had been inside the server room had been turned to slag. The data from Microtech was safe. Of course, once his sabotage was discovered, Mac was going to be angry and desperate. But Merid was counting on that. With Microtech's key codes changed over every month, the hacker only had a limited time to re-access his system and direct the virus to a new output relay before being completely locked out. All Merid had to do was ensure that his trap was ready before then. A simple trace file. He didn't expect it to take very long to program at all. He started up the skiff and piloted across the ice back towards New Babbage. He was planning on getting a good night's sleep before his meeting with Tammy in the morning. But then again, he thought, glancing at the drive sitting on the seat next to him, maybe just a little like reading before bed.
Ho ho ho, it's me, Father Nordmus. That's right, it's that time again to see who's on my naughty list for who doesn't have a VPN. No, that's Northern Claus! Grass from Northern Claus, Timmy. You should be scared of not having a VPN. As you know, Father Nordmus punishes all that disobey him. It's the perfect Nordmus present, Timmy. There's no excuse. I can see all of your website history, and I'm going to sell all of your data, Tim.
NordVPN helps protect your online activity, gives you greater accessibility to the content you want by changing your location, and much, much more. Go to nordvpn.com/BoredGamer before Das Northern Claus finds you. Do you like using your eye holes for extra immersion in Star Citizen and help aim and do some cool stuff? Well, you can with Tobii Eye Tracker 5, which is on sale at the moment. This gives you native high-precision head and eye tracking in Star Citizen. Very cool for general immersion, for combat both in ship or on foot. They are absolutely fantastic pieces of kit, and both Zin and I have one. Use the links below to grab one or to find out more. Every month we have a Star Citizenship giveaway. For December, we are giving away a Drake Corsair. It's the winner of the 2953 Ship Showdown and one of the stars of the Intergalactic Aerospace Expo. This fantastic multi-role, multi-crew, long-range mission runner can do a bit of everything in-game, and it has a penchant for exploration. Just comment on any of my videos during December to be in for a chance of winning that. There are further details in the description below. A big thank you to everyone that goes the extra mile in supporting the channel via Patreon or the join button under my videos and becoming a channel member. It will net you some exclusive content from Zin and I, but also it really does help us to be able to create daily Star Citizen content, as does sharing these videos and commenting. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the verse.